I don't think I can overlook the ULEZ scheme in London, which is to say the ultra low emissions zone, which is pitched as a way to improve the quality of air in London. But as is demonstrably the case, it's a power grab and a money grab. It's a tax by a latter day highway robber, a 21st century Dick Turpin. You know, we hanged Dick Turpin for highway robbery, but highway robbery is back again. And it's, you know, for people out with the United Kingdom, it's not just in London. It's going to be rolled out eventually in every town and city in Britain. And I'm sure the same thing is happening all over the Western world. We're being told that it's all about saving children's lungs by improving air quality. But it's nothing to do with that. As always, the issue is not the issue. It's never about what they say it's about. It's an excuse to tax people, to further impoverish and immiserate the people, the middle class, and to sneak in yet more surveillance. It's an excuse for another phalanx of cameras to keep an eye on everybody's movements and watch number plates on cars and all the rest of it. You know what it is? The powerful are at war with the people, and the powerful have been at war with the people for years. And I say right at the front, right at the top, I find it humiliating and embarrassing when I realise and accept how long I overlooked the blatant evidence of that war being waged. It's a war. They're at war with us. The powerful are at war with the people. It's a cold war. You know, it hasn't really come to bullets and bayonets yet, but the clock's ticking. Watch this space. But in every way they can think of, the powerful are at work impoverishing the people. That's the form that it's taking. They're impoverishing those they have made all but helpless in the face of the tyranny. They have taken advantage of the law-abiding nature of the people. They have exploited the tendency of the majority of the law-abiding, tax-paying people to keep their heads down and not make waves. I would say the most significant battle at the moment is the offensive being waged blatantly against those who have worked all their lives towards building better lives for themselves and their families. It's becoming unavoidable. We can no longer ignore the fact that the presence of a middle class in Britain is no longer to be tolerated by those who would prefer dependency on the part of the people that they want to rule. Not govern, not serve, but rule. They'll stop at nothing until the middling class of the Western world is made poor and dependent upon the handouts of the ultra-rich and the politicians that the ultra-rich pay for and control. You know, it's so enraging. The powerful care not a jot for the health and well-being of the people. It's clear to see, far better, as far as the powerful are concerned, if more and more people here in Britain and elsewhere in the West are made fat and sick and poor, and therefore more likely to welcome sinister offerings like universal basic income, which is an abomination waved in the face of a once proud and independent people. I think about this all the time. It's an anecdote. Years ago now, and when I say years ago, it must be 15 years ago, at least, a friend of mine who at the time was working as a freelance sound recordist. So this was somebody that I knew through work as a jobbing TV presenter. He landed at an airport in one of the southern states of the US. I can't remember which one. He got into a taxi. He arrived separate from the rest of the crew for whatever reason. He was getting himself a taxi to get dropped off wherever he was needed. And the taxi had no sooner sort of pulled towards the exit from the airport, but they hit a pedestrian crossing, and shambling across the taxi had to stop, and shambling across the crossing was an enormous couple of people, morbidly obese, barely covering the reality of them. And my friend made some sort of remark within the hearing of the driver. And the driver turned round and looked at him and said, "Have you got half an hour?" And my friend said, "Well, yes, why?" He said, "If you'll let me, I want to show you something." And so he knocked off the meter, stopped the meter ticking on the taxi, and he drove him into like a suburb of the city. And it was long, straight streets past verandaed houses, low income houses, but single story with a veranda out the front, and old couches and deck chairs and things out the front, and people sitting on those. And they were all huge, all enormous people. And the driver turned to my friend and said, "They're turning us into battery hens, man. They just want us fat and sick and stupid." And they drove like that past house after house, street after street. And then he said, "Have you seen enough?" And my friend said, "Yeah, I get your point." The guy turned the meter back on and drove him to wherever it was he was supposed to be. I think about that all the time, because he had noticed what was happening to the people around him. That's just an anecdote, as I say, in spite of the evident erosion of health and well-being, which is driven deliberately by toxic food and unhealthy lifestyles that are all but foisted upon us. The people are being encouraged to be unwell. Don't worry about it. Eat what you like, get as big as you like. Big pharma will come up with a pill or an injection that'll deal with that. Don't take responsibility for your own well-being. Don't bother going to the gym. Go to a fast food outlet instead. And they want people dependent. The intention is to make the population dependent on the products of big pharma, because that's the bottom line, the big fat bottom line. And even now, here at home, the powerful use health as a pretext. In the face of that, they use health as a wholly fictional pretext for further eroding the UK population's freedom and privacy. The powerful, the government, the state, the establishment, they don't care about the health and well-being of the people. Throughout lockdown and the rest of it, it was gyms that were closed and parks that were closed and fast food outlets that were open. It's not about taking care of the health and well-being of the people. The erosion, the evident erosion of health and well-being is plain to see. It's driven by toxic food, frankly. Vegetable oils, seed oils, sugar in everything. The promotion of unhealthy lifestyles. Get as big and fat as you like, and Big Pharma will come forward with a pill or a potion or an injection to take care of those consequences. God forbid people should be responsible for their own health and well-being. But even in the face of all that, there's this pretext of health as the motivating factor for new legislation. It's a wholly fictional pretext. And all it does is further erode the UK population's freedom and privacy, and by further stealth brings in more surveillance, more cameras, this time recognising number plates and the rest of it. But it's just to demoralise people and get them more and more accustomed to being watched 24 hours a day as they go about their lives. And, here in the UK for weeks, certainly for days, the headlines in the mainstream media have been about the launch of the ULEZ, the ultra-low emissions zone in London, which has now been extended to cover the whole of London. So it goes right out into the rural area, out into the fringes where air pollution monitors show figures like 2.5% in terms of air pollution, when any figure below 10% is good quality air. When everyone knows that if it was anything to do with health, that the London Underground would probably be shut until further notice because of the figures down there, into which people are herded because they're discouraged from using their cars or any other private transport, and they're herded down into those toxic zones. So if it was actually anything to do with people's health, it would all be being handled very differently. And the mere fact is that if it was about the health, it's always about Sadiq Khan talking about asthmatic children and children dying because of the air they're breathing. And if it was actually motivated by saving children's lives, then he would simply say all cars of a certain characteristic are banned. But he doesn't. It's all about air pollution and the quality of the air being breathed by children. But apparently for £12.50 you can pump out as much pollution as you like. So it's a nonsense to say it's anything to do with health. It's about money. It's about another taxation on people. And it's also about more control. The London Evening Standard, which is like if you walk through London of an afternoon, that's the paper that appears on the newsstands that updates Londoners. And their headline is Gotcha. It's a big picture of a ULEZ camera pointed at the reader, and it says Gotcha. London's green dream comes alive. Day one of a brave new world for our great capital. Brave new world. I mean, where have we heard that before? And this nonsense, it being about health. The TfL, the Transport for London's own report, conceded that the impact of the ULEZ scheme so far, in as much as it's already been operating in a more centralised part of the city, has had negligible impact on air quality. It hasn't done anything that any worthwhile machine can measure, right? So it's just a money grab. More surveillance, more taxation. And that idea of, everything we're told is about saving the planet, making the earth greener, making the planet a healthier little ball hurtling through space. Everywhere you look, you see the nonsense of that, the insincerity of that, the lie of that. The Nord Stream pipeline from Russia into Europe via Germany was blown up by the Biden administration. The Joe Biden US White House sanctioned the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline. That was an act of war against a NATO ally. That pipeline was blown up in the faces of the German people. Germany being the most powerful country in Europe, and Europe being the most significant ally that the US has left. It was nothing less than an attack on Germany's industrial capability. Its economy, full stop. When we know that it's cheap, accessible, reliable energy and the prosperity that flows from such that elevates people out of poverty. That's been the story throughout the 20th and into the 21st century. The destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline meant the greatest man-made release of CO2 in human history. I'll say that again. The greatest single man-made release of CO2 in human history. And they knew that would be the consequence of blowing up that pipeline. So evidently the US says to hell with worrying about CO2 released into the atmosphere. Everything is about control and dominance and the extension of both. And by the way, for people closer to home who are aware of the political situation in Britain in a way perhaps that people in the wider world are not, pay no attention at all to Conservative Party protests about what Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, has done. Yes, Khan sought to persuade scientists to rewrite their reports using language and data more favourable to his scheme. Yes, the TfL report, the Transport for London report, made plain that ULEZ hasn't worked. Yes, there are plans for a pay-by-mile scheme for cars in the future. No, it's not about health. And as I said before, if it was, London Underground would be a no-go zone until further notice. But make no mistake, the Tories, the Conservative Party, are just absolving themselves of responsibility. They're holding Labour's coat while Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, and his deputy Angela Rayner make no secret whatever that they plan to roll out ULEZ schemes to every town and city in Britain in the event of their forming a government in the aftermath of a next general election that they are broadly expected to win. But the Conservative Party, in the end, are every bit as committed as Labour to the suicide note of Agendas 21 and 30. They're every bit as committed to the anti-human, frankly murderous lunacy of net zero for the world. The Conservatives and Labour are two shrivelled testicles hanging low in the same scrotum, juiceless and with no life left to give. They're just occupying a space. What is incoming is ever-increasing surveillance, 15-minute ghettos to live in, digital identification, central bank digital currencies to control how, what, when, and even if you spend your own money. Control, control, control. And to me, underlying all of this is tragedy. The tragedy is inevitable because people, decent, otherwise law-abiding people who just want to go about the business of leading decent lives, are being pushed inexorably into a corner. One by one, their options are being stripped from them. They see their living standards eroded day by day. They see the prospects for their children and grandchildren hopelessly diminished. And they're made to feel powerless in the face of it. And eventually, and here's the tragedy, unknown numbers of people will have nothing left to lose. And people with nothing to lose are unpredictable, to say the least. And what a tragedy in this law-abiding country of ours, that so many will be left with no option but to take the law into their own hands. They're being pushed knowingly into that by the authorities, by the establishment. And what then, if and when civil obedience breaks out? I mean, the so-called Blade Runners are already out there. That's a team that are operating throughout London, disabling the ULEZ cameras. They're cutting the cables, or they're taking the cameras down completely, or they're spraying paint and whatever insulation foam across the lenses just to knock them out of service. People are already acting in defiance. But what happens when that civil disobedience spreads? I don't know, a curfew for London, let's say. Let's imagine they just shut the place down from 6 o'clock in the evening until 6 o'clock in the morning. I don't know. What about curfews across the country? What happens when people have no alternative but to defy legislation in order to provide for their families? I've said it before and I'll say it again, but it's the obligation. It's not just the right or the responsibility. It's the obligation of lawful people to stand in defiance of unlawful government and unlawful legislation. You can't stand by, you know. The front page of the London Evening Standard has name-checked Aldous Huxley's grim prediction of the future in the form of Brave New World, his most famous work. But I say we are also looking at a war of the worlds, to name-check another. At this time, the invasion and threat comes not from Mars, but from the enemy within, which is the aforementioned powerful and their puppet governments here and around the world. That war, albeit a cold war, is being waged right now against our way of life. It's a war against our world. And at the end of the book, the technological monsters, the robots, have been undone and fallen, not because of anything man has been able to do in the face of it, but because of pathogens in the air. Ironically, they're brought down by bad air, as far as they're concerned. So the invaders die. But the last page of the War of the World is a wake-up call for the world. To quote, that so much was so nearly lost has, says the narrator, robbed us of that serene confidence in the future, which is the most fruitful source of decadence. How true. How unknowingly, unwittingly decadent we have been these decades past, while unseen by most of us, the powerful have moved to invade our world and take control of it. Perhaps it's that decadence that has kept us blind for so long about the activities of those who want power over us, total power. You know, I don't feel it's too extreme to make dire warning of what is imminent, what is happening, what has been inflicted and imposed and snuck in under the cover of democratic government. What a joke that is in this country. Look at what is happening. Today it's ULEZ. Tomorrow it will be something else. Until eventually, if they, the powerful, have their way, we will have nothing and we will be unhappy.